keep on pouring. The world just keep on turning. It won't be too long. Our world keep on lying while the people keep on dying. World keep on turning. It won't be too long.
Hi, good morning, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to That Saturday Show. This is episode 37 of our second year, and I'm your host, Tom Dent. That Saturday Show is seen on Albuquerque Public Access, Comcast TV 27, our YouTube channel, and Facebook. That Saturday Show is brought to you every week by the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice, where we strive to create a world where our collective needs are met sustainably and nonviolently. We value the interconnectedness of all life. We emphasize cooperation and respect diversity. We're committed to nonviolent conflict resolution, working for peace within ourselves, our community, and in the world. Thanks for tuning in. Later on the show, you'll be hearing music from Matt John, our music director, doing Billy Bragg's The World Turned Upside Down, and Sweet Nothings ends the show with the song I Don't Mind. That Saturday Show is broadcast every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. However, we record the show every Wednesday evening, and so at Studio 519. So as of tonight, which is November 16th when we're recording, we're breaking down the current 2022 midterm election results, both in New Mexico and nationally, and discussing what those results mean and what they entail for the future. And joining me in the studio tonight is Laura Dale, public access activist and founder of Safe Sets, and Steve Cabietas, the host of the Duopoly Report and frequent election analyst on KA&W Radio. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us tonight. But first, here's what's coming up at the Peace Center at 202 Harvard Southeast. Our annual yard sale is going on right now this Saturday, November the 19th, from 9 to 2 p.m. inside the center this time. So please come out to the sale and benefit our great work. Buy some nice donated items. At the same time, our free food distribution, which takes place every Saturday, is going on in our parking lot starting at 9 a.m. We offer a meditation session every Wednesday at 9:30, and yoga classes run from 1:30 to 2:30 every Wednesday and Saturday. And finally, don't forget to stop by the center every Thursday from 10 until 3 for our Peace Cafe, featuring great organic free food, coffee, tea, music, and conversation. So stop on by, check us out, come to the center, become a member, or have your group become a member. Please donate to us to help us continue our very important work. If you have questions, please call 505-268-9557. Or if you prefer, check out our website and donate electronically. Please go to abqpeaceandjustice.org. Thank you, and please support the Peace Center. Okay, before we get started, remember the Peace Center is a nonpartisan group, and the most of this analysis, a lot of our opinions here are our own and not necessarily representative of the Peace Center. So, hi folks.
Hey, Tom.
So we've got a lot to talk about, and I know Steve and Laura and I are very passionate about politics and work in the community, so we could go on forever, but we're trying to kind of segment this and preface things. So I will start with a very generic question for Steve and Laura, and then I'll come back and give my opinion on it. Folks, I'll start with Laura. What are your what were the 5 most important issues that you were concerned about with these midterm elections, both nationally and, well, let's start with nationally.
You know, honestly, as a woman and as a reproductive rights activist of many, 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 many years, also someone who, I've never said this on camera before, I had an illegal abortion when I was 17 from a very, very abusive relationship. And I don't say it lightly. I don't say that it was an easy decision. I was very grateful that I was able to make that decision at that time. I'm not sure where I would be if I'd had to keep a child in that abusive a relationship. So for me, honestly, at this moment in history, especially as someone who canvassed for the previous attempt by Bush Sr. to destroy Roe v. Wade, I think it's the only issue, because what it's saying to me when they make these decisions is I'm a second-class citizen whose body belongs to the country, and they get to decide what happens to it and what trajectory my life goes under. And I think that one of the things I will speak to tonight is just the fact that when you take away women's rights and you don't understand that there's going to be a serious backlash, which is what the Republicans are struggling with right now, it's because you don't think women matter and you don't think our lives have any meaning or any relevance to what goes on in the world. And what has always been fascinating to me, and what I predicted with this election, which was that it was going to be a very tight, if not potentially very Democrat victory, is don't mess with us. Don't mess with our ovaries. Don't tell us in the 21st century that our bodies belong to you and that only you know what we should be doing with our lives and how we should bring children into this world. So to me, it's the only issue at the moment, because what it speaks to is whether I'm a human slave or whether I have agency in this country.
Steve?
Yeah, well, I think there was a number of things that I looked at. I looked at candidates that were more serious about, honoring our election system. People who are election deniers, I found to be problematic. And I've been a skeptic in the years. We're lucky in New Mexico that I think we worked hard back in the early 2000s to create an election system process that was about as clean and editable, not editable, verifiable as possible. But yet that conversation keeps happening in our state, especially in the south and southeast parts of the state. So candidates that were a little fuzzy on that issue, I had a problem. My other big deal has been police accountability. So on a lot of, and this happened in commission races, county commission races, sheriff races, and other things, is that I looked at candidates at whether they truly were going to look at police culture and reform, or if they were just more thin blue line, death cult type folks. More money, more money for the police, more guns, more toys. Federally, I looked at also if there was any shred of hope of people actually questioning our sending zillions of dollars to the Ukraine without any question, when they don't give zillions of dollars to the homeless or whatever at the same rate. Those were big ones for me. The other is just a general sense of ethics from candidates. I always scope for that, because on all sides, you have people who are of ethical character and people who are just sellouts, and so I'm always on the lookout for that.
Well, I agree with you about defense budgets and throwing money towards conflicts overseas and stuff like that. And I'm sure you folks out there that watch that Saturday show and follow politics have seen the huge graphs of the pie chart of most of it filled up with this massive defense contracting and military spending. And it always seems to me that we have some kind of war or conflict going on all the time. If it's not Iraq, it's Afghanistan. We pulled out of Afghanistan. Now, despite what's happening in the Ukraine, we're throwing $30 billion at a time to help weaponize the Ukraine. And I have been, since I was born, even though I served in the military, pretty anti-militaristic and anti-religion. And this kind of ties into the whole thing, because like Laura was talking about Roe and women's rights, and I'm very glad she's here because Steve and I originally planned to do this together, and then I said to myself, no, I'm not going to do an analysis unless there is a strong woman advocating for women's rights. My number one topic, is, especially in the state, was right to choose and women's health. But I have a 17-year-old daughter. I'm really concerned about her life and safety and treatment in the future. And yeah, my wife is a nurse. She was ready to move our whole family out of the state if Mark Ronchetti became governor. And you know, his counseling, you have the RGA, you have all these people out of Washington and this money, but directly here, most of his counseling on that issue came from the mega churches. He was taken aside by Reverend Pastor Steve Smotherman for Legacy Church for 2 hours because he thought his initial stance on abortion and women's rights was too weak, and he convinced him to go all the way back to moment of conception. And like they were doing, most of the Republicans were doing across the country, you know, this even included rape and incest. So when you talk about, you know, I'll let Laura talk more about this because, you know, I don't think that a male has any right to mess with women's health, to control her body or anything like that. But like, if you go to the far right church and the far right quote unquote Christianity and the type of influence they've tried to create, like stacking the Supreme Court, you know, there's a number of dominionists in Trump's cabinet. There's a number of different Republican administrations who worked to stack courts across the country, and now we see 3 very unqualified new Supreme Court justices. This is a stacked, far-right, almost Christianized court that advocates basically patriarchy and men, especially white men, trying to control this country and trying to control minorities and women's rights.
I mean, the thing that I always get back to is twofold. One is, this is a colonizer agenda and has always been.
Right.
Our country is a colonized country. And anyone that wasn't of this sort of European ancestry, like ties to the castles and whatever thing, which is why our White House looks like a castle, was basically either going to be eliminated, turned into slaves, or as women, being these birthing machines for either the war or, you know, honestly, what right now, and I shouldn't even be smiling when I say this, I do a lot of work with undercover, and have done a lot of work with undercover detectives who deal with child trafficking. And what people don't understand, and I have talked to some reasonable pro-lifers about it, is when you take away a woman's right to choose, you are making the illegal child trafficking porn market so happy. Because how they really, and I know this is disgusting, but people need to understand this. When you produce that many unwanted children that you can disappear off the map, if you look at even like the Catholic Church with all the scandals with child abuse that goes on, what you will see is a pattern with these people of, they want like 3 to 5-year-olds. And so once a child is past 5 years old, they're not looking for the 6 and 7-year-olds. They're looking for the next 3 to 5-year-old. That's why they love it when a priest is merely reprimanded and sent to a new area, because then there's a whole bunch of new 3 to 5-year-olds. And they're not going after wanted children. And that's my point. I'm not pro-abortion. Mm-hmm. I'm pro-wanted children. Right. And when you take that away from women, and we're merely baby machines that either fuel the military or child trafficking, you're not a civilization anymore. Yeah. And that's why I'm so grateful for the people who came out of the woodwork. And we'll talk about this later. I want to hear a lot from you about just so the polling numbers and stuff, but we'll talk about this later. I have a long history with tracking elections that were supposed to go red, like Bush Sr., and went dramatically blue. And I can tell you about the demographic. And when you go after people's ovaries, when you go after women's ovaries, and it brings the youth vote out, and it brings the disenfranchised
And if I could
Yeah.
bring in a case in point, the most recent case in point that I could see clearly by the numbers was during the primary season in Kansas. There was a special question about basically creating a heartbeat life definition for life inside the womb, and it failed. But the interesting thing is that 300,000 Republicans showed up to vote in their Kansas primaries, and 200,000 Democrats showed up to vote in the Kansas primaries. So if it was a straight party vote, the Heartbeat initiative theoretically should have won. But so it was clear it was going to take a certain rather large chunk of Republicans to vote no to defeat that, and it went down, and not even in a squeaker. It went down pretty big, which means that I've always, that showed me something that I'd always seen through the numbers, which is there are Republican women, adult Republican women, who may never talk about this in the open, who will never say anything, and they go to churches that are against all of this and all that, but when they go into their secret ballot box, they're either voting for themselves or their daughters or someone else's daughters, and that's the beauty of our secret ballot.
Well, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories from canvassing in California. So this was back when Bush Sr. was, I don't know if you remember, if you're old enough to remember the split screen, Bush Sr.'s on one side with his stern cell phone talking to the Pope, and on the other side the Pope's answering him, and they're vowing to end Roe v. Wade. So we're going door to door all over California. We are going to trailer parks in Orange County. We are going to mansions in Hollywood Hills. We are going all over the place. And it was just so fascinating to see. At one point, I knew a woman who had been working on a campaign with Barbara Boxer. And Boxer she was good at getting Republican women, intelligent Republican women, to support her because they liked her feistiness. They liked what she stood for, and they were pro-choice. They wouldn't say it publicly because their husband was this or whatever. And so there's this wonderful story that one of her interns told where Barbara, her Republican women donors, who shall remain nameless, were going to lay out a big chunk of money for her campaign. And so she has this huge conference room, and then she's got this lavish lunch that she's going to do. And what she decides to do beforehand is lay these little rolled up pieces of paper on their lunch plates. And the ladies are sitting there in their Chanel suits and with their, all their stuff, and they open up the documents, and it's adoption papers.
Oh, wow.
And basically the women had shown up and said, we're gonna give you some money, but you just have to lay back on the pro-choice thing a little bit. So Barbara said, ladies, since you're so concerned about human lives, these are actual children that you would be a wonderful parent for. And this is like, I don't know, 40, 50 women sitting around this table, all of whom were at least millionaires. And the intern said they went white from their hairline to their Chanel shoes, wrote out these huge fat checks, and just left. They never even served the lunch because the mirror had been held up to them. When you finally tell them what it really means and what the responsibility is, if you are going to bring these children into the world, they don't want to take it on.
Yeah.
So Republican women in their secret ballot box will vote choice.
Yeah.
Well, apparently that was part of the strategy. What they talked about in the when I guess what's his name 45 was running and stuff like that, was getting the suburban housewife vote and stuff like that. But what did they expect about that? That they'd be more conservative. That there was more of a percentage of these people that went to these patriarchal pro-life churches or whatever, and that didn't necessarily work out for them.
Yeah, I just think to me, I've always said that having a pro-choice stance does not restrict someone to use their faith to guide their decision in that moment when they have a very important decision to make. And people who want to use their faith to say that their faith informs them not to do it, they're still free to not have an abortion. It's not forced abortions. It's just having a choice. So it really offers, and then I have, some sort of like theological feelings that we're supposed to be here on this planet to make choices anyway, and that
Right.
forcing people to be good is not really like the way it should be anyway. So, allowing individuals to just have that moment of, on their own make the choice. It just seems natural.
And we know, even when Trump 45 came here in 2016, the vast majority of his audience in the convention center came from Calvary Church and Legacy and maybe Sagebrush. And I've seen some of these families bopping around town and in department stores and stuff like that. And they may have a beautiful wife and daughters and stuff like that. But the dad is always like lurking around the corner, making sure that everybody behaves like his. Like it's his property. It's crazy, and that's sort of like the same thing with police operations nowadays and politics. They care more about property than the condition of the human being.
By the way, I don't think that Ronchetti truly had a chance to win this race to begin with, but Steve Smotherman in some ways is the gift that keeps on giving, because by engaging Ronchetti the way he did, or by saying what he said on his church pulpit the next Sunday, whether it was completely true or not, put him in a bind in a state that, although Catholic, it has a large Catholic population, everything, is generally pro-choice when you look at a statewide thing. And he ended up taking about 4 different positions on that issue throughout the campaign, which is never good for a campaign to be kind of wandering. And the funniest thing I saw was when the League of Women Voters voter guide came out, where they asked 2 or 3 questions and just put down what people write, the candidates write for those answers. In the Ronchetti section on the choice question, it was absolutely blank. And that showed a campaign in complete crisis on how to handle that issue. So like for a campaign that needed to be firing on every single cylinder to have a chance to win, that really just took them out. So thank you, Steve Smotherman. I appreciate it.
And you brought up a good point too. When you look at the U.S. Supreme Court, it's like their religion should not influence their decisions. And back to Steve Smotherman, 4 to 6 times he's out in the open and been caught red-handed crossing the line between church and state. One time outside of the church, there were people registering people to vote. He's been caught with sample ballots with a candidate of their choice highlighted in the pews right next to the Bible. I mean, he should have lost his tax-exempt status a long time ago, but he just sits up there like a Teflon Don saying, you can't mess with me.
Here's a fact you may not. I did some research on this because I have wondered about this question too. The department within the Department of Justice that handles, that would handle cases or requests like this, they have no lawyers on staff for it. There's 0 lawyers to handle these.
What's their excuse?
Uh-huh. Now that we have a new, and we'll talk about this after a break coming up, now that we have a new Attorney General, what powers does he have to enforce something like that? Or is it federally mandated?
It's federal.
Okay. All right. We're going to come back with much more, and we're going to take a little break for about 3 minutes. You're going to be listening to Matt John doing World Turned Upside Down, which is actually covered by Billy Bragg. It's more of a traditional song out of England, but it's all about workers' rights, and we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Matt John. The song is The World Turned Upside Down. It was written by Leon Rosselson in the 70s and famously recorded by Billy Bragg. In 1649, to St. George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the law. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the lands in common and to make the waste grounds grow. This earth divided, we will make whole, so it will be a common treasury for all. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. We will not bow to the masters or pay rent to the lords. We are free men, though we are poor. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. The sin of property we do disdain. No man has any right to buy or sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder, they took the land. Now everywhere the walls spring up at their command. From the men of property, the orders came. They sent the hired men and troopers to wipe out the diggers' claim, tear down their cottages, destroy their corn. They were dispersed, but still the vision lingers on. You poor take courage, you rich take care. This earth was made a common treasury for everyone to share. All things in common, all people one. We come in peace, the orders came to cut them down.
Hi, we're back. Thanks, Matt. If you watch the show, you know that I'm a veteran for peace at the Peace Center, among other things that I do. I was in the Navy for a while, but and like I said before, I've been kind of anti-military ever since I was born. But I'm not a pacifist, and I do think that we do have to defend ourselves against certain things. Like, you know, I'm not going to lay down in front of a tank for a cause, but if you try to attack my family, I will fight back and stuff like that. But like when we had James Janko in here, and we were talking about how much the global military, especially the U.S. military, destroys the environment and contributes to climate change, and the fact that we have, what, close to 760 military bases around the world, it's like we don't really need that. We don't need, at least in my opinion, at least 60% of international military presence. That's protecting colonization. That's imperialism. That's empire, and we don't need to be messing with all these foreign countries. But if you bring it back to New Mexico, you know, one of my spiritual reasons that I came to New Mexico was to shine a light or do serious activism within the heart of the military. And you know, here we are. If you're not from New Mexico, you may know or you may not know that this is the birth of the atom bomb, that Los Alamos National Laboratories created some of the most intense weapons of mass destruction in the world. Sandia Labs, you know, has their reactors and contributes to that very development. We have at least 3 major military bases here in the state, especially Kirtland, that's supposed to defend our southern border and stuff like that. And one of the reasons they do a lot of training operations here in New Mexico is that our terrain kind of is similar to places in the Middle East, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and stuff like that. So being at the Peace Center and being anti-nuke and anti-war is not the most popular thing in New Mexico, because a lot of people, especially a lot of trained white people, make most of their living from here. And a lot of people would say, you know, I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but there's a lot of connections with a lot of perceived or real corruption here in the state. Like, who controls the state? Does the military control the state? Who controls the legislature? We've been told by a number of people in the legislature that they're scared to death of the police. You know, who determines who's mayor of Albuquerque and who controls dossiers and may threaten city councilors? Is it the police? Who's behind that? Is it the unions? And a lot of people think that the police union has way too much power here, especially the Albuquerque Police Union. Steve can probably attest that one of the major swings for candidates for mayor is getting the endorsement of the police union. And people have gone to the independent monitor and people monitoring the consent decree and saying, why aren't these reforms really taking place? And a lot of them are stymied by the police union, and they set these salaries, they set these progressive salaries. If you stay a police officer in Albuquerque long enough, you can retire a millionaire, really, with full benefits. And when we get into the governor's race and how the legislature is supposedly dealing with crime, like one of the things a couple of years ago or was it last year that they were proud of was to end qualified immunity. And the bill really didn't have enough teeth to be effective in kind of dealing with the powers of APD. And the bill really was a reflection of an old bill on the books like 20 years ago or so, and said the exact same thing. But and another thing that's kind of upsetting that came out in the local news last week and made daily cause and kind of national media was that controversial police chief Harold Medina skewed the crime figures in Albuquerque that the governor and people who are running for office were basing this on, and Mr. Ronchetti and stuff like that. And after the election, he came out and said, well, if you look at the figures, aside from homicide and police homicide, the rest of the crime in Albuquerque, New Mexico, has been progressively going down for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Which one of those do you want me to take first?
All 10.
What I would say is that, the Albuquerque Police Officers Association, to me, is a very suspect organization. And I'm pro-union, but one of the things the deal that unions are supposed to make is that, yeah, you're going to pay a little bit more for the union workers and everything, but we're going to train them and we're going to teach them how to do their job professionally and well. And we have known cases now of theft of what do you call it when you steal the money out of the embezzlement of police funds by police officers, the tune of like $20,000 a month, and yet there's still nothing happened, or the police chief didn't send the right paperwork to the New Mexico law enforcement agency, or whatever the board is called, law enforcement board, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And so now they can't even get rid of him. And that stuff to me doesn't happen by accident, and it is troubling to me. And I know Mr. Olivas, who's the commissioner-elect from the Northeast Heights and East Mountain area, who's touted as a progressive Democrat, did send out an email, glowingly, happy that he got the endorsement of the Albuquerque Police Officers Association. Mm. And so I'm going to be watching Commissioner Olivas very carefully on the issues of the Sheriff's Department and its operations. And hopefully we've got a sheriff-elect who says that he's more reform-minded, Mr. Allen. So, like I said, like with everything, just you need to never go asleep and pay attention as things go on. On the military front, the thing we've talked about it before is that for the last 20, 25 years, the military budget's never gone down. And it doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter who controls the houses of Congress. It continues without stop. And this is probably why I have that duopoly report show, is because, there's too many, there's some bitter battles on social issues, but when it comes down to helping billionaires in the military, especially on the federal level, the Congress seems to be wildly in sync with each other, no matter what side you're from. And on the state legislative side, it is interesting to power map and to see where things come from. Oil and gas has a heavy hand. Real estate has a heavy hand. Yeah. And I'm sure that, the federal contracting, we are very dependent on the federal money. That weighs always in the background of everything that we do.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why, in my opinion, we had to get many more people engaged in activism and environmental issues and creating different sources of energy here. I mean, Look what they're threatening in Ukraine, blowing up these oil lines, driving up the price of gas. I just heard that diesel globally is going through the ceiling and stuff like that. And we've talked about on the show before that, we have the resources and the land to power half the world in New Mexico with solar energy. And also, we've been, my group on Facebook has been discussing this book called The Fourth Turning and stuff like that, and how the baby boomers have screwed up and sold out to the neocons and the war machine and stuff like that. And the one thing that I noticed both in this election cycle, both locally and nationally, is nobody really talked about the real elephant in the room, which is climate change, which would kill us all within 20 or 30 years. We've been doing things the same way forever and expecting different results, and it's really time to listen to our youth and get them involved. And I'm convinced that the 30-year-olds to the 16-year-olds right now are going to organize and possibly help save the world for humanity.
That was your point, Laura, on the choice issue,
Right.
that you were pointing to some of the younger voters probably having a super heavy sway in the pro-choice
Well, that was the
side,
thing that was
right?
so beautiful. So, as we say, it's a cliche, like as goes California, so goes the country. But it is kind of true because it's this massive state with a very influential and active population on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
They really know how to organize. And so I was going door to door with Bush Sr. and also with Obama. I was up in Northern California with Obama. And what was interesting is people think that, so we've conveniently forgotten that Bush Sr. seemed like he was going to win. And we've conveniently forgotten that Obama the first time was 40% behind in the polls. We don't remember that because he's the golden, wonderful first-time black president, right? We were like hearts in our throats about this, going door to door. And what was fascinating is there's a whole demographic that you can't factor into polling numbers. It's first-time youth vote. You can't put that in your figures. So when Republicans want to say, we've got this down, and that's based on all the previous voters. First-time youth vote, you go after things like race, you go after things like LGBTQIA, you go after things like, job wages for young people, and especially the choice issue. They come out of the woodwork because that's who gets hit the hardest when arrogant, I don't know what you want to call them. It's this colonizer mentality that only white old males from European ancestry should run the world and everybody else is some form of peasant. And that's really, I'm a peasant, If I was a black woman, I'd be a double, triple, quadruple peasant. And so this whole thing is just a caste system that is enforced in a whole bunch of ways through, pregnancies, through military, through whatever. But what's fascinating is I actually almost lost a good friend of mine, and she's a raging liberal just like me because she was angry. She was afraid in these elections. She didn't believe that we had a chance. I knew from California. We would go door to door, and then 10 o'clock at night with all of the data we'd gathered, we'd be like, oh my God, we've got this. And then what you spoke to would be like, we'd be in Orange County. Orange County is like Republican squared. Mm-hmm. And we'd have all of this, like, I'm signing the petition, I'm really going to vote, and you don't know until someone gets to the polls. But when we got the numbers back, and when Obama catapulted into a landslide victory we hadn't seen since Kennedy, what we understood, what all activists understand who do door-to-door grassroots, particularly in California, is the terrifying thing they don't want to have happen is youth vote going to the polls. That's why pot is illegal. It's why all this sort of doomsday everything. If we can keep young people from going to the polls, they decide elections. They decided Kennedy, they decided getting rid of Bush, and they decided Obama.
Right, and so if you see modeling in polls, and polling is a very difficult science because the biggest thing that they have to try to do is to model the turnout correctly so that they get a correct kind of view of what happens.
First-time youth vote, you can't
First
do
time
that.
youth vote. Well, so you can get stats from past elections as to what the 18 to 24 or 18 to 30 vote had done, and then put that percentage of people in your polls.
But only
they
if it's an issue they
But
care
if they
about.
turn out more,
Exactly.
you'll get that
Yeah.
skew. And I think
Yeah.
that did happen here
It's a
in
sleeping
many
giant.
different places. And we even have an elected 25-year-old congressman going to Congress.
Exactly.
So Gen Z has arrived on the scene, and Republicans who have been just basically smacking on them from the beginning on the issues that they care about are stunned as to why they're not they may not be getting performance. The one thing I talked about in this whole election cycle, and I kept arguing with some local political thinkers like Joe Monahan and some others, is that the stories were all out. Oh, the Hispanics are all going Republican because of the choice issue, that the white liberals are too domineering on this issue and they don't like it and they're all going to be Republican now or vote Republican. And then there was all kinds of other national sort of fear-mongering going out, and this is going to be a giant Republican sweep, blah, blah. And also when we saw polls that were coming out, the polls were kind of, to one degree or another, agreeing with all of this. And it was casting
The red wave, yeah.
the red wave, or I equate it to almost like the shadow that Sauron put out over the lands outside of Mordor to make everyone feel depressed. And, creating a pall over the season.
But that's a tactic.
Meanwhile,
That's a tactic.
right. And meanwhile, when I was doing some of like what you were saying, I wasn't seeing it. And also, we'll get probably to this, the redistricting in the 2nd Congressional District, and how I just knew from a certain demographic area and other things that the stories I was hearing in the wind didn't seem to add up to what I was seeing. And so we had a situation where we were allowing this fear machine to work. And the one thing I get after the Democrats is they actually campaign on scaring the hell out of their voters. And, they send out fundraising emails that start like, I'm afraid, this is horrible news, I can't believe this. They're always talking about how they're going to lose everything and not how they can win everything. And partly because I believe they don't actually want to do the things that their Democratic constituency wants them to do. They would rather win just by not losing. And they did accomplish that this time.
Well, back to what Laura was saying, the youth and turning over everything to the youth right now is so very important. And they have different ways of communicating. A lot of times when they're doing these pollings out of Washington, other things like that, they're media dominated, which is basically controlled by very wealthy conservatives that back Republican parties and things like that. And Steve and I have worked with polling initiatives and on campaigns. And we see how a lot of, they relied forever on, and the Gallup poll forever on landlines. And now it's mostly, past 70-year-olds that have landlines, and they'll vote a certain way with their bent, and a lot of them are conservative. The youth have their own way of communicating. They have their cell phones. They tap into different type of political discourse, not the mainstream media and all that stuff. And you're right, on the Republican side, they have their own way of fear-mongering. It's like, enough of this fear. Let's move together. And back to the youth vote, I became aware of how important that was in 1970. My sister, who's 5 years older, was very involved in lowering the voting age from 21 to 18. And we're drafting people at 18 to die in foreign wars, but they don't have a say in the run of this country.
Because they're terrifying. And that's it. If I want to leave a message with anybody watching this, it is that youth vote is so dangerous that they will do any kind of deflection they can to alienate them, to keep them from actually voting, which is absolutely, in my opinion, why the pot thing ever was an issue. You can lock up a whole bunch of young people, now they have a criminal record and they can't vote. So all of these systems that we think are just morality, no, they're human control mechanisms to keep what is the majority in this country. We've forgotten, again, Democrats are the majority, and when we show up in our numbers, we decide elections. And when we show up in our youth numbers, we sweep the elections. And that's why Kennedy was such a threat. It was the first time our archaic political system had been lifted up by a whole bunch of just very idealistic young people and just catapulted into the 20th century, So we're dangerous. You're dangerous. You're writing our computer codes right now. Like half the stuff we're using on our computers, some 18-year-old with a backward baseball hat came up with that code.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Aaron Schwartz developed RSS software technology that expands software across the globe when he was 15 years old. He became a co-founder of Reddit when he was, like 19 years old or something like that. And we've had older members at the Peace Center, and at the Peace Center and even the local Democratic Party, they keep going like, oh, we need diversity, we need youth in here. And now we have interns from the high school that are working on our website and newsletter and stuff like that. And they're going like, we have young people working on this. And it's like, they know this 1,000 times better than we do.
Yeah, they grew up with it. It's like, in their sleep.
And they are afraid of us. They are afraid of the youth. And in a way,
Terrified.
one thing that we haven't talked about, the figures are out that over the pandemic, the disparity of wealth is like quadzillion. We have 3 billionaires to trillionaires that have more wealth than 40 to 50% of the population, and we're kind of prisoners, especially through usury. Do we have national health care? We have massive student loans. What else are the?
And so I would say to you that you were talking about.
We have the largest prison population in the world.
Right.
We've got the revolving door. We've got the school to prison pipeline to keep youth down.
And remember, I have to go back and remind people that a lot of this was signed by a Democratic president named Bill Clinton.
Bill, yep.
Was championed by a Democratic senator named Joe Biden. So it's not enough. Like in California, they have super majorities of Democrats in both the House and the Senate, there's Assembly and Senate. And yet they're promised California Medicare for all thing. Never happens. They're putting out more oil drilling leasing in the state. And so it's not enough just to elect Democrats. You got to go in and find out what they're really about, because there's so much money in the system. They're purchasing everyone on all sides. It's like the late 1880s, really. And so we can't just look at the label. You got to dive deeper than that.
Well, but and the thing I would say too, though, is the one thing about California that keeps it from just going over the edge is people are really engaged in their political system, and they don't think, oh, I elected him, all is wonderful.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to knock on his door. I'm going to show up at city council. When he makes that vote, I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to have all my friends make a phone call. We're going to have the whole school rally about it. Like, we keep thinking participatory democracy means we vote. No, you have to be at your council meeting. It's just like parent-teacher. Your school system is not going to serve you unless you go to your parent-teacher council meetings and get your voice heard.
One of the nice things is, in this day and age, is that we don't necessarily have to physically go there anymore.
Right.
There's live webcasting of commission and city council meetings,
And who came up
state
with that?
legislatures.
Young computer
Oh,
programmers.
absolutely, absolutely. And come to find, even though that's something they wanted, it's actually working for everybody.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, it actually was a salvation of keeping government running.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you have it just on in the background, blah, 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 while you're doing something else, you'll pick up on things that you wouldn't know about otherwise. And highly recommend it. That is the work. You're right. It's the work of the citizenry. And I call it work because sometimes listening to committee meetings or state legislature or council meetings is just like, oh my God, are they going to, but you have to go through all of that, and you'll learn very valuable information.
And it's really, if your government isn't working for you, it's because you're not getting up and asking it to. You're just, I did my vote, now I'll go on with my life.
That's it.
And that's one of the things that attracted me originally to the Peace Center. You have people that are like 99 and 96 years old right now. Sally Alice Thompson, Mandy Pino. They've been on the doorstep in the roundhouse since 1954. They go to their congressman's office. They go to the senator's office. They get involved in these activities. They get involved in national campaigns. They never stop the work.
Yeah. So we want to go to the Congress real quick now and what happened? And
Yeah, let's get
Well, just talking about New Mexico, and
Okay.
we'll get into it. The two most recognized national races in New Mexico were the governor's race, and also District 3,
Two.
District 2, and District 2 has always been strange. It's always been perceived as a rancher, oil worker type of rural, very conservative district and stuff like that. And we know from associations and stuff like that, you had, what's his name in Otero County, the Cowboys for Trump person.
Cooey.
Yeah, Cooey, and Yvette Harrell was an election denier. She supported these insurrectionists and stuff like that. But the one thing that was interesting is that district was redistricted that now includes most of the South Valley.
Right. So District 2, like you said, it's seen as a more rural district in the past, and it's true that the population centers are basically Las Cruces, and then in the southeast corner, Roswell, Hobbs, and Carlsbad, and then everything else was pretty rural and small population. The district got shoved to being like basically a southwestern district now, where it goes up and down the Rio Grande Valley, from Las Cruces all the way up, like you said, into the South Valley, part of the west side of Albuquerque, and it has the southwestern counties. And so and it does go to Otero County, and actually it does. There's a little finger all the way out to get half of Hobbs, okay?
great.
But
Hobbs is a weird place.
overall, it's shifted to the west, where the main core of it is in the southwest of the state, and it's more Democratic, and then especially up in Albuquerque. And there was a 6-point shift demographically towards the Democrats in the redistricting of that district. But not only that, is that one of the things I argued about was that the nature of the Democrats had changed in the district, because you had Democrats from Clovis, Portales, Hobbs, Roswell. They're not the same kind of Democrats that you get from the South Valley and the west side of Albuquerque. They tend to be much more loyal to the party label. The importance of certain issues is weighted differently than the ones in the eastern part of the state. So it was a lot more advantageous. Now, and people argue that Gabe Estes was a weak candidate, and I think that he was good enough, and the demographics helped, and I think that there was a gamble on the Republicans' part that they could do the crime scare, and that they could also maybe do the choice issue with Hispanics and carry the day, and it did not happen. And I think actually in the late stages, Vasquez and company put out ads talking about the insurrection thing, waving the Confederate flag, and showing all the QAnon stuff, and kind of just reminding people, like, this is what you'll get if you keep this person in office. I think it was enough, and I think going on, it'll be harder and harder to unseat a Democrat.
And also
I
went
just
into
want
the
to say
idea.
really, really quick, just very, very quickly, some of our greatest activists for reproductive rights are Latina and Native American. So we always skew that. This state always messes with that whole, Latino population, very religious kind of thing. We have some of the best reproductive rights fighters in those demographics
And I
in the
think
country.
age also comes into play, doesn't it?
Some.
Yeah. All right.
And when we're talking about different demographics of minorities are going to become the majority.
I hate that
now.
term.
I know,
Can we
I
come
do
up with
too.
a new term?
And according to the figures in 2050, at least, that those communities are going to outnumber the white community and stuff like that, and they're fear mongering on those issues too.
It already does.
That well, look at Florida, for instance. I mean, the Republicans and conservatives have taken over the radio airwaves in Miami and southern Florida, and even in Texas, and converting a lot of Latinos to vote Republican. And what is my point here? I mean, it's the other thing when you're talking about the red wave was certain pundits have said that at least 30 or maybe less active Democratic members of Congress either retired or dropped out because they were so afraid of this red wave that was coming. But and like Steve is indicating, it might be a good thing for a while to expose people like Nancy Pelosi and their support of the huge war machine and stuff like that.
Well,
and shake
what
things
I
up.
just want to say really quick is that if we start getting candidates that the youth vote cares about, we're going to start being much more blue.
Right.
We keep not Nancy Pelosi does not get young people to the polls.
Right.
Ocasio-Cortez, all these younger politicians, if we can start trusting that youth actually knows what they're doing and can put the country on the right track, young people are going to come to the polls and we're going to see a lot more blue transformations. We keep putting in politicians and issues and whatever that they just don't care about and that don't mean anything to them.
Right.
They tend more towards demographics of democratic policies because they know they're inheriting the filthy water. They're inheriting the next war. They're the ones taking on the consequences of our horrible decisions. So they're going to tend to go towards a democratic platform. We just keep giving them people like Nancy Pelosi that have no representation in their lives whatsoever.
So here's
If we're going to make progress, if the progressives are actually going to have serious say in the running of this country, then we have to develop and trust in the youth, or as they say, turn the wheel over.
right.
To the
Well,
youth.
and I know we're limited on time now. I just want to bring up this point. As of the taping today, the Republicans have officially taken over the House. I mean, just by the thinnest of margins. There's still more seats out, and they're probably going to gain 2 or 3 more seats. So they're going to be in control of razor-thin margin. I think this is a great moment for progressive Democrats if they pay attention for 2 reasons. Number one, the leader, Pelosi, at best will be minority leader, and she may not even run again after 2 years. I think she's been a big cancer on the Democratic Party as a whole. But number two, already members of the very extreme right Patriot Coalition, which is about 20 or 30 members in the Republican side of the House, are saying to Kevin McCarthy, you can't become Speaker without our votes. And so here's what we want, A, B, C, E, F, G. 2 years ago, the progressives had the same chance to force the vote on this thing, and were pressured not to do this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even though you may not agree with the Freedom Caucus or Patriot Caucus and what they want to do, it's about power politics and how you manage it, even when you only have a group of 20 or 30 Congress people.
And when you bring in
and
young
learn
people,
that.
when you bring in young people, they're not tied to all that stuff.
And it's sort of like the last presidential primary season,
So.
Apparently, Bernie was bringing in all these numbers and had huge rallies and stuff like that, but you never saw it on TV or in the mainstream media. And then all of a sudden, this initiative through North Carolina and stuff with Biden and Obama, and all of a sudden, where's Bernie? They just forced him out.
Yeah.
Well, Democratic National Committee voted to put Hillary in. So I just want to say to everybody out there who's watching this, youth vote matters like you cannot believe. And you need to trust that you are a force to be reckoned with that they are terrified of. And you need to start understanding that power and not letting anybody take that away from you and start using it. Get more young people elected to office. Really start showing up and getting your voices heard, because you're writing the codes of everything that we do nowadays. You should have a much bigger say in your political system.
I think if people are not younger, and I think some of them fret about what younger people like or don't like or the culture they want to live in, is like, just let them. Like, they're not going to change the culture overnight. It's by the time they do, we'll be dead. So let them organize the atmosphere that they're going to have to live in for 30 or 40 years.
And they did this. They did this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, everybody who voted, bless your hearts. But youth vote and disenfranchised, quote, minority vote is what created all of this obliteration of the red wave. So pat yourselves on the back because you did this.
Thanks for joining us, Laura and Steve. Thank you all for hanging with us, and I think this has been very informative and intense. And I'm sure we'll be back to discuss more of these issues in detail. Right now, we're going to end the show with a little bit more rowdy music than what Matt does, with a group called Sweet Nothing doing I Don't Mind. Thanks for tuning into that Saturday show, and hopefully we'll see you next week. We may go on a little bit of a vacation, but thanks for tuning in.
I really like you. I think I love you. Don't wanna fight you. Just wanna touch. I don't mind what you wanna do. I feel fine when I'm next to you. just wanna